Well, the third African Continental Free Trade Area Business Forum is currently underway at the Cape Town International Convention Centre. It is the first in-person business forum since its inception in 2020. Delegates, members of African states and various stakeholders will, over the next 3 days, discuss ways to advance the flagship project aimed at boosting intra-Africa trade. On that note, let's cross to our team in Cape Town for the latest updates on the forum. SABC News reporter Katlego Legodi is covering the story for us. Katlego, good afternoon. Perhaps on the back of what we spoke about earlier on, just exploring some of the strides that have been taken, perhaps also some of the agenda-setting measures that have been put to place. What's happening on your end? What else can we expect as day one gets underway?
Good afternoon to you, Lizel, and to our viewers at home. Of course, an exciting period for Africa, for the continent, as we see most of those nations, 54 of them, gathering here at the Cape Town International Convention Centre. We're coming to you live from the back of an address by Minister Ibrahim Patel. His address was delayed a bit in terms of him welcoming the guests that are here. We're talking about 1,200 of those guests that were waiting in anticipation for the minister to really welcome them onto the home soil, this being South Africa. And of course, the minister taking to the podium to address critical issues around this space, talking about the need to unlock the value chain, talking about also the need to ensure that we reverse the legacy of colonialism where this intra-trade is concerned. There have been concerns as well around how the mineral resources on the African continent are not working for the economies of these nations. So the minister just welcoming the nations here and talking about how the 3 days should just come through with solutions and just ideas around how really we can explore this Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement. I'm going to bring into the conversation now Date Temba Kumano. He's joining us from the AfCFTA. He is, of course, the value chain advisor there, and he'll just let us in on really reflect with us in terms of the minister's address on the podium there, and just let us in also on what we can expect from your end as you're hosting us, as well as the AfCFTA. Yeah. Welcome to the SABC, sir.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity. As you say, it's an exciting moment. It's a culmination of a lot of hard work by mainly the Secretary General at the back of the support of heads of government and state in the continent, who, as you may probably be aware, since the launch of the AfCFTA, we have had about 47 countries that have deposited their instruments of ratification, and then obviously you can never get such kind of political support and not appreciate it. So we are here in what we consider to be a trade dialogue platform, bring together Africans, bring together entrepreneurs, big businesses, development finance institutions, to look at how can we be able to leverage on the AfCFTA to be able to do what probably would have eluded us for a couple of years since political independence in the continent. As you would remember, former President Kwame Nkrumah would have always spoken about how we should economically integrate and transform the African continent. And we believe this is a platform that we have now arrived at. Unfortunately, obviously, we came to an existence, or at least the establishment of the Secretariat at the height of COVID-19, which obviously kind of like distracted many of global supply chains, which affected the continent the most. We could not get vaccines. Right now we're having challenges around geopolitical issues, which also obviously affected the continent. This platform says to us, how do we leverage on the AfCFTA so that we can be able to look at this single market of 1.3 billion people at $3.4 trillion to be able to make some changes that will be able to see an increase on how we trade amongst ourselves, so that if there are such global shocks, we are at least able to still be able to support Africans to continue with their lives, create jobs, as we say, increase this intra-Africa trade from the usual below 18 or 16% to higher percentage, so that we can then be able to economically integrate the continent.
What would be your takeaway then from the minister? We know very well that from very early in the morning, the delegates started arriving here, most of them in anticipation of what the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition is going to say to them here in South Africa. His department very critical in terms of ensuring that there's movement within this Africa free trade agreement, and more or less most of them just talking about how really the tariffs and all of the stumbling blocks will need to be addressed, starting here at home in South Africa, going and exploring the African continent, because we know very well that Africa forms part of the three most developed nations that will play a critical role in ensuring that this movement, this Africa Free Continental Trade movement, finds its meaning. What will be your takeaway from what the minister said?
The minister set the tone very well, and obviously we appreciate the fact that there's a lot of expectation from South Africa as a country, given its industrial base, and because we expect a certain level of leadership in as far as how do we drive investments. He reflected on the South African Investment Forum conference, which the president hosted about 2-3 days ago, and obviously the continent expects the same around, so that we can be able to ensure that the benefits accrued to the continent is cut across. So we're looking at how do we ensure that we can be able to look at opportunities across the continent, even by South African investors, to be able to go there, make investments on products that can actually be able to find themselves in the South African market or outside the continent, for that matter. So the minister says, look, we should be able to break this colonial system of trade where everyone extracts minerals and then export them without even value addition. We are saying we have an opportunity, as I said, to leverage on this bigger market of 1.3 billion people to be able to do things that will ensure that we can be able to get our people employed through value addition, through processing, whether is it agricultural products, whether is it mineral resources in the continent. So we have that opportunity. As I said, South Africa has a play to role. Those that are considered to be bigger economies need to be able to lead the way without obviously abusing the market, because I think, as President Ramaphosa always continues to say, we should be able to recover from COVID-19 in a manner that does not leave anyone behind. Those that are said to be small economies in the continent need to find themselves involved through what we call value chains development. We have examples of how, let's say, some of the automotive companies would have invested in Lesotho to supply in the South African automotive sector for exports into Europe, USA. And so countries are looking at that. We want to make sure that we can be able to justify some of the investments that could not be made as a result of disintegration of our economies. Now we have that economy of 1.3 billion, which provides enough economies of scale to be able to justify those type of investments. And I think he has done well in setting that tone for the next 3 days to come.
You are our host. More or less, we know very well that most of the delegates that are here have expectations in terms of those commitments, and this is the first physical interaction of this kind. So most of them just coming to South Africa with high expectations as to how this is going to work, the agreement, how it's going to find meaning, and how they're going to be accommodated in those various sectors that you're going to be focusing on. What can we expect in the coming days that will be tangible to these delegates that are gathered here?
I think in the main, we consider this to be a platform of engagement with the private sector. We have seen as part of our work that there has been limited knowledge in as far as what opportunities are available under the AfCFTA for the private sector. So in the room, yes, you will find government policymakers, but in the main, key to our priority is to engage with the private sector so that they can be able to reflect where should we be able to make changes. How do we ensure that harmonization of regulation is done to allow movement of goods and services across the continent? How do we ensure that business persons can be able to freely move in the continent? So the next 3 days is actually meant to have that deep discussion about what are key policy recommendations that, as I said, leverage on this continental market. And by the way, we have always mentioned that AfCFTA makes us think continental, but it's expectation that all member states will have to do some policy development, implementation locally to take advantage of that. So it is where we are saying, private sector, what are the issues that at least these member states who have signed this agreement should be aware of? What is it that development finance institutions should be able to be aware so that they can be able to direct their funding in those? So it's that kind of a conversation that should therefore be able to lead to some investments being made in a manner that can be able to ensure that we can be able to deal with inequality, develop decent jobs for Africans, ensure that we are able to do that in an inclusive manner that brings in women in trade, small medium enterprises, young people. We continue to see the growth of the middle class in the continent that should be able to justify the market necessary for investments, both domestic and foreign, to be able to take advantage of that. So that's what we pretty much looking forward to over the next 3 days.
Yeah, very, very important high-level engagements expected where this is concerned, and also those commitments. We wish you everything of the best. It's not going to be an easy one because we know very well that the economies have really been battered over time on the African continent, and there's a need for transformation where that is concerned. That is my guest, Mr. Themba Khumalo, coming through from as an advisor of value chain at the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement, just making sure that as they set the tone, the minister also spoke earlier on, and they're just talking about how they're going to ensure that this will find meaning, and those delegates, about 1,200 of them that are gathered here, they leave rest assured that there's a movement in this space. Back to you in studio, Lizzo.
Katlego, thank you for that update. Again, we'll monitor what's happening on your end. At 4 o'clock, there is a keynote address that's set to take place today. This as the third ABF is underway in Cape Town.